First of all, we are getting together after a long gap. In fact, for some reason or other, we couldn't take it up for almost a month or so. So we are taking it up again. So probably you remember that we had earlier discussed in our last two sessions regarding our being. First our outer being, then our inner or subliminal being, and finally the psychic being. And after that, some sounds are coming. I think this someone's microphone is giving some trouble probably, no? So today we'll be discussing about the subconscious and the inconscient, and also the superconscient. So what is subconscious? Normally we people talk about our subconscious mind, and the perception we have about it is somewhat different from what Sri Aurobindo thinks it to be, or gives us the thing to be. So subconscious is actually what is below our conscious mind or conscious life. In fact, our whole being, right from our head to toe, this is called the conscient being. It has the consciousness.
Sound going
Some sounds are coming probably. So subconscient is below the conscious being. What we know about the conscious being to be is from head to toe, to our feet. It is called the conscious being. Although we know very well after discussing about all those things about our being in the last two sessions, that it is not fully conscious. It is not fully conscious because it is the outer consciousness we always live in. And in fact, there are so many things which we receive from the universal consciousness. I mean, the subliminal, the inner consciousness rather, which penetrate to our outer consciousness. And there are other things also. So this we discussed. So subconscious is that plane of consciousness which is below the feet. And like as we find in the subliminal is what? It is behind the outer consciousness. Whereas the subliminal is an inner and larger consciousness compared to the surface consciousness. The subconscious is neither an inferior and diminished consciousness. It is diminished and inferior. It is not fully conscious. So let us see what Sri Aurobindo, how Sri Aurobindo sees it in his own language. The subconscious covers the purely physical and vital elements of our constitution of bodily being, unmentalized, unobserved by the mind, uncontrolled by it in their action. So what is it? Subconscious covers the physical vital elements of our constitution of our bodily being, unmentalized. The mind does not touch the subconscious. Unobserving also. The mind also doesn't observe what is its work, the subconscious, how does it work. It can be held to include the dumb occult consciousness dynamic but not sensed by us, which operates in the cells and nerves and all the corporeal stuff and adjusts their life process and automatic responses. So it is somewhat like, a mechanical working. Subconscious working is somewhat mechanical. It has its sense mind, and but we do not know how does it operate, and it is kind of involuntary in nature. When it works, we do not know it's working, but suddenly it crops up. And how does it crops up? We will be finding it very soon. But before that, it covers also those lowest functionings of submerged sense mind, which are more operative in the animal and plant life. Actually, this subconscious is is a kind of functioning which is lowest in its uh, nature, and it is more operative in animal and plant life. And with the process of evolution going further with humanity, we have now no need or less need of it rather to fall into its working. Although it still disturbs us, how we will discuss it. But however, although it still disturbs us, it is always there. The subconscious is always there. The subconscious recording is always there. And it still operates, if not fully, to a lesser extent in human being. It remains submerged and obscurely at work below our conscious nature. So we discussed that it is our conscious nature from head to toe, but it operates down below it, remaining below the conscious nature. So this obscure activity extends to a hidden and hooded mental substratum into which past impressions and all that is rejected from the surface mind sink and remain there dormant and can surge up in sleep or in any absence of the mind, taking dream forms, forms of mechanical mind action or suggestion, forms of automatic vital reaction or impulse, forms of physical abnormality or nervous perturbance, forms of morbidity, disease, unbalance. So, what happens without even our conscious mind in sync with it, when we reject something with our conscious mind in our conscious life, what happens? All those things go down to the subconscious subconscious brain of consciousness, and it remains dormant there. And only when our mind is not conscious, not operative, when it is in sleep, when we go to sleep, in dreams, or even without dreams, it comes to the surface. It gives suggestions, and all those suggestions are to the detriment of our spiritual progress. So it is something very queer, because we do not know how does it operate, how does it function, but remaining hidden somewhere down below our feet, it emerges when our mind is not active minded. So, and all those, you see, what it is written here, forms of automatic vital reaction or impulse of which we are not aware. Automatic vital impulse reaction, physical abnormality or nervous perturbance, forms of morbidity, fear of death, disease, unbalance, all that stuff slowly surges up. Out of the subconscious, we bring ordinarily so much to the surface as our waking sense mind and intelligence need for their purpose. In so bringing them up, we are not aware of their nature, origin, operation, and do not apprehend them in their own values, but by a translation into the values of our waking human sense and intelligence. That means when we do not know normally their origin, their nature, how does it how do they operate, but only when they get translated in our waking consciousness, we do not know how do they come, but only when they come and does the thing which we do not want, and we sometimes we are quite taken aback and are surprised that how come that this has happened to me, how come I have uttered such a thing, how come I have done this and that. All that happens as if involuntarily. We do not have control over them. It's very interesting actually. We think that, even we accuse also sometimes people that he has done this thing, so and so is such a this thing, such a, he has uttered such a thing which we cannot imagine even, or he has got into an action which is totally despicable. But behind all these, we do not know, only because we are not aware that how all these things happen. It is only Sri Aurobindo who has brought all those things to the forefront for us to see, to understand, and to slowly practice all those things which will eventually free us, or rather make us free from all these actions, thoughts, feelings. But the rising of the subconscious, its effects upon the mind and body are mostly automatic, uncalled for, and involuntary. For we have no knowledge and therefore no control of the subconscious. So that is subconscious. Its working is totally hidden or hooded, as he says, and we do not know how it comes and takes sway of our whole being. Now about the nether realm of consciousness, that is the inconscient, as we know, it is below the subconscious, which is called the inconscient, the nethermost plane of consciousness. It is not really devoid of consciousness, as the term might imply, but a level of consciousness which represents a total involution of consciousness, the inverse reproduction of the supreme consciousness or the superconscious. That means inconscient would not have been there if the superconscient is not embedded in it. In fact, as we know by now, that there is nothing out of the divine, out of the ambit of the divine rather, because the divine pervades everything. The divine holds, in fact, the divine projects himself, holds, and manifests his thousand workings. And what is this inconscient we're talking about now? It is the nethermost projection of the divine at the topmost rung it is the superconscient, and at the nethermost it is the inconscient. So we can say that in the inconscient also the divine is there. The superconscient is involved. In fact, it is the evolution, probably we had discussed earlier also, that the divine extends himself through different planes of consciousness, right from the uh, triple poise of Satchidananda, through supermind, the link or the conjoining plane of consciousness, into the overmind, and down below, intuitive, illumined, and higher, all those planes of consciousness, down to this earth and even below. So the divine is at work. In fact, the first, as we know, the first process is the involution, that is projecting downward, so to say, downward, going right up to the nethermost region or realm, that is the inconscient, and the divine again evolves from there, from inconscient level to matter first. Matter is the first one to evolve or the emerge from the inconscient. Then there comes life. Then is born mind. And then there are other, all those planes of consciousness which we talked about. That is right from ordinary through higher and illumined, intuitive, overmind, and supermind, and finally back to Satchidananda, the triple poise, unmanifest. So this is the return journey. So in a sense, even though it is the nethermost, the divine is at work in that plane also, because it is embedded with the superconscient. Now let us come to the superconscient. What is that superconscient? The superconscient consists of higher levels of consciousness above the ordinary mind, from which the higher consciousness comes down into the lower planes of the being. And what is the role of the superconscient? The role of the superconscient has been to evolve slowly the spiritual man out of the mental half animal. Mind the language Sri Aurobindo uses. Why mental half animal? Because although we have our mind, predominantly um, we go by mind, but still we have the instincts which we carry in our being, instincts of animal. Earlier also we discussed about all those things, probably with Sri Aurobindo's beautiful expression that scratch a little, the beast will come out of you. That was a beautiful example we always can have. Our common, so we have all those experience. If we give a little bit of time to ourselves to see what we are really, we carry all those instincts in us, but usually we attribute all these to others only. In fact, I am carrying my lower animalistic nature in me, and only when someone else pokes me out, immediately my lower nature, the animal nature, comes out to the forefront, and I engage myself in a altogether unbecoming way, behave in an unbecoming way, get into some quarrel, don't we? Or there are so many examples of all those things if we only can impartially see. So that way, he's absolutely right when he says that we are mental half animal. If you tell someone this much in a circle of elite, I think you would not find a place afterwards. But see how true it is. The moment someone pokes you, the moment someone teases you with some strong impulse, you immediately react. And that reaction is always not good, not good enough, in fact. So, now the superconscient includes the higher planes of mind, that is, higher mind. Let me add here that we always remain normally in the ordinary mind. The whole multitude living on earth, we remain in the ordinary mind, excepting a few only, of which we can discuss afterwards, like rishis and munis, and a few very higher poets, or some kind of they receive you see some kind of a intuitive ray, a flash sometimes, by which they can take the right decision, go with the right words. But for us, the greater multitude, we always remain in the ordinary space, ordinary mental space, and above our ordinary mind, it is the next is higher mind, then illumined mind, intuition, and overmind, and above that, the link of which we talked about is supermind, connecting the Satchit Ananda, that is the unmanifest divine, with the lower planes of consciousness, right from overmind to ordinary mind. Now let us go a little bit deeper now with each one. Higher mind. I mean by the higher mind a first plane of spiritual consciousness where one becomes constantly and closely aware of the self. Self is not that self of which we are aware, the self which is the true self of ours, that is the divine presence. The one everywhere and knows and sees things habitually with that awareness. Only when one is in the higher mind, he sees everywhere and everything habitually with that awareness. But it is still very much on the mind level, although highly spiritual in its essential substance. And its instrumentation is through an elevated thought power and comprehensive mental sight, not illumined by any of the intense or upper lights, but as if in a large, strong, and clear daylight. It acts as an intermediate state between the truth light above and the human mind, communicating the higher knowledge in a form that the mind, intensified, broadened, made spiritually supple, can receive without being blinded or dazzled by a truth beyond it. You see, what we know about the superconscious to be, or the supermind to be, it is the top rung of the consciousness, and also that plane of consciousness where there is a total oneness. We have probably discussed often about it, the characteristics of supermind, but still a little bit of it. It is a total oneness where there is no division, where everything is uh, everything can be perceived through identification of oneself between the subject and the object. So that is supermind. But even below the supermind, the next level, that is overmind, in which the godheads live, all our pantheons of Hindu pantheons and all others also. And there are others also which the mother uh, calls them to be formatures. Probably you have heard about it. They are those entities or beings who takes form and manifest a particular form and manifest it. So what I wanted to say is that the more until and unless the ones who are living on earth, that means we human being, until and unless we are at a point, at a stage where we are not that much illumined or that much purified to receive the higher power, till then the powers of the supermind cannot come down. Rather, it can come down, but we cannot receive it. In fact, we will be shattered into pieces. What happens when normally, uh, as we know, instead of 220 volts, 440 volt comes? What will happen is it is DC, direct current. So immediately everything will be shattered. So it is something like this. It is so powerful, so pervading, that the instrument or the other also has to be very, very supple, very purified in all the uh, layer, triple layers of the being, that is mind, vital, and physical. Until that happens, it has to regulate its pouring down of forces of light through a screening which is over mind. I believe you can get a little glimpse of it. You see, supermind, if directly comes down to us, then it is so powerful that at one instance it will smash everything. But if it is regulated, or there are some screening is given there in between, through that it percolates down, retaining the higher powers and only giving those powers which we can receive, those lights which we can receive. So through all these layers, all those powers and lights and whatever spiritual these things are there, they are given in a regulated manner to us, so that we can receive and we do not become complacent, but receiving as such grow in our stature, in our being, open a little bit more, and in that process become more receptive to receive higher powers. So this is the process of the integral yoga through which one goes. It's, of course, it's a long process, but then what happens? Slowly, one's other, the instrument's other, is made ready to receive higher powers. That is why, through all those planes of consciousness, one has to ascend. And finally, when one is ready, he can receive it here itself on earth, that other, that particular other. So, what we know now about the higher mind, one everywhere knows and sees things habitually with that awareness, but it is still very much on the mind level, although highly spiritual in its essential substance, and not illumined by any of the intense or upper lights, but as if in a large, strong, and clear daylight. Slowly, it is opening the higher light in this particular realm of plane of consciousness, that is higher mind. It is opening out, and it seems to be almost in a clear daylight where we can see things from a deeper perspective. Now, about the illumined mind, a mind no longer of higher thought but of spiritual light. Here, the clarity of the spiritual intelligence, its tranquil daylight, gives place or subordinates itself to an intenser luster, a splendor and illumination of the spirit. A play of lightnings of spiritual truth and power breaks from above into the consciousness and adds to the calm and wide enlightenment and the vast descent of peace which characterize or accompany the action of the larger conceptual spiritual principle. A fiery ardor of realization and rapturous ecstasy of knowledge. So you see, slowly, when one is ready in the higher mind, then slowly the other higher power, a little bit higher, that is spiritual powers, are coming down so that he can receive it. A more lightning and spiritual truth breaks from above into the consciousness. One after another, it's happening. Then what is the next level? It is intuition, or also called the intuitive mind. Intuition is a power of consciousness nearer and more intimate to the original knowledge by identity, for it is always something that leaps out direct from a concealed identity. It is when the consciousness of the subject meets with the consciousness in the object, penetrates it, and sees, feels, or vibrates with the truth of what it contacts, that the intuition leaps out like a spark or lightning flash from the shock of the meeting. Or when the consciousness, even without any such meeting, looks into itself and feels directly and intimately the truth or the truths that are there, or so contacts the hidden forces behind appearances. Then also there is the outbreak of an intuitive light. Now, here's a catch here. Ordinarily, you see, intuition means the power of understanding things immediately without the need of conscious reasoning. I want to know something, immediately it comes and I understand, oh, achha, this is this. And I don't have to take the help of reasoning. No what it is called in logic. Um, there are some processes by deduction, by all that stuff, we reach a conclusion that this is the right thing. But ordinarily, it means intuition means straight away getting into the truth. But here, what Sri Aurobindo says, intuition is a power of consciousness nearer and more intimate to the original knowledge by identity. When one gets, I suppose I have talked about it a little bit, a little earlier also, uh, it is more so in the supermind, but it is a reflection in the intuitive mind. So, when something is to be known, the knower only has to identify himself with the object, whatever the object is, whether we may call it um, material object, and we may perceive it to be lifeless, but it is not so in truth. Everything has its own consciousness, as we know by now. Then what happens if I want to know what this tree actually is, other than what it seems to be? Like, it has its trunk, it has so many boughs, branches, and there you will see the green leaves and all that, some fruits also maybe. That is the outer expression of it when you see a tree. But beyond that, you do not know. But when you have that power, when you have that consciousness by which you can identify yourself with the consciousness of the tree, then you become one with the tree. That is why you probably remember in Mother's prayers and meditations, she was referring to uh, a cherry tree, and the cherry tree tells her that, I'm useful in smallpox, probably. If I'm sure, it's smallpox the tree was talking about. So I'm useful in those particular diseases. And all that, I mean, the whole inner nature of the tree. And we also know there are other instances where we have come across those stories, true stories, of course, about the banyan tree. When the matrimony was constructed, was being constructed rather, then near that matrimony, then there was this banyan tree, and people were working, laborers were working there in the construction site, and they used a lot of other tools. And one person left his eggs pierced in the banyan tree, and at night the soul of the banyan tree came to the mother, because it knows the source of everything, the divine mother, she being the divine mother and the source of everything, the supreme conscious force. It came to her at night, and immediately in her consciousness, um, she realized that something has happened, something is wow, some person has put, I mean, pierced something into its belly, its trunk. So it is hard, and that's why it has come. Immediately, she called someone to go to the banyan tree and pull it out, and accordingly the person did. So there are lots of other instances also when she immediately gets identified, because she's the source, as we know, and everything comes to her, everything. So intuition is that plane of consciousness where when one has that consciousness, one can identify with the object, and whatever is there in the object, it can come in a flash to give the hidden truth which it entails. Now, above that, that is intuitive mind, there is overmind. The overmind knows the one as the support, essence, fundamental power of all things. But in the dynamic play proper to it, it lays emphasis on its divisional power of multiplicity and seeks to give each power or aspect its full chance to manifest, relying on the underlying oneness to prevent disharmony or conflict. Each godhead, as it were, creates his own world, but without conflict with others. Each aspect, each idea, each force of things can be felt in its full separate energy or splendor and work out its values. But this does not create a disharmony because the overmind has the sense of the infinite, and in the true infinite, many concording infinities are possible. So, in the overmind plane of consciousness, what happens? Overmind knows, although its role is to manifest multiplicity, which is its basic working, because supermind, as we said earlier, as we discussed earlier, cannot directly come down and have its working on us. So overmind is the overmind is the so overmind is the plane through which it receives, but it gives power of aspect to different worlds. In fact, all the godheads, all they create their own worlds, but without having to come into conflict with each other, because each has his or her own domain, his or her own power to manifest, creating all those worlds, then running it, running all those. So, all these aspects, each idea, each force of things can be felt in its full separate energy or splendor to work out its values. But there is no disharmony. In its nature and law, the overmind is a delegate of the supermind consciousness, protinity. It's delegate to the ignorance, or we might speak of it as a protective double, a screen of dissimilar similarity through which the supermind can act indirectly on an ignorance whose darkness could not bear or receive the direct impact of a supreme light, of which we talked about a little bit a little while earlier, that because it is so powerful, we will not be able to receive or hold it, will be smashed. So there is needed a screen or a layer through which the permitted quantity only can be allowed to pass onto us, so that we can receive and grow with the consciousness gradually. Even it is by projection of this luminous overmind corona that the diffusion of a diminished light in the ignorance and the throwing off that contrary shadow which swallows up in itself all light, the inconscience became at all possible. So, what happens? Overmind being such a plane of consciousness which receives the highest of the powers, force, light, still it is that plane of consciousness which also holds ignorance. It is the root of ignorance which finally goes down, which whose final shadow falls on the inconscient, which is in total darkness. For supermind transmits to overmind all its realities, but leaves it to formulate them in a movement and according to an awareness of things, which is still a vision of truth, and yet at the same time a first parent of the ignorance. So, overmind does a beautiful, wonderful job receiving and regulating that higher power of the supermind force light and manifesting it, multiplying it through different powers, through different godheads, but still somewhere it has this tinge of ignorance which finally boils down to inconscience. Now about the supermind. The supermind is, in its very essence, a truth consciousness, a consciousness always free from the ignorance, which is the foundation of our present natural or evolutionary existence, and from which nature in us is trying to arrive at self knowledge and world knowledge, and the right consciousness and the right use of our existence in the universe. The supermind, because it is a truth consciousness, has this knowledge inherent in it and this power of true existence. Its course is straight and can go direct to its aim. Its field is wide and can even be made illimitable. So, what does it possess? Supermind? Self knowledge and world knowledge. Everything. It contains everything in its bosom. It doesn't need any outer agency or help to know or to act on something, but everything is in its territory, its realm. This is because its very nature is knowledge. It has not to acquire knowledge but to possess it in its own right. Its steps are not from nations or ignorance into some imperfect light, but from truth to greater truth, from right perception to deeper perception, from intuition to intuition, from illumination to utter and boundless luminousness, from growing widenesses to the utter vasts and to very infinitude. On its summit, it possesses the divine omniscience and omnipotence, but even in an evolutionary movement of its own graded self manifestation, by which it would eventually reveal its own highest heights, it must be in its very nature essentially free from ignorance and error. It starts from truth and light and moves always in truth and light. So, that is the nature of supermind. It moves from truth to truth. It cannot at any point of time make a mistake because it is not a plane of consciousness which is half merged or submerged and takes help of the next higher level of consciousness, it being the supreme oneness of which it is aware, infinity of the triune, that is Sat, Chit and Ananda. Sat, that is existence, Chit, that is consciousness, and Ananda, that is delight. All these three gunas, triple poise or triple status of the divine, which is infinite, are all in the supermind. And it is only because of it, it can give freely to overmind, and in turn, overmind regulates it, as we said, downwards. And now finally the Satchit Ananda, existence, consciousness and bliss. It, that is Satchidananda, is one eternal existence that we then are. One eternal consciousness. Why eternal consciousness? Because it has no birth and no perishability, also no death. It's the eternal thing. It neither takes birth nor dies. Anadi Ananta, the divine in its true poise, is Anadi, that is, he has no end, and at the same time, Ananta, infinite, which sees its own works in us and others. One eternal will or force of that consciousness, which displays itself in infinite workings, one eternal delight, which has the joy of itself and all its workings, itself stable, immutable, timeless, spaceless. When we talk about earth, humanity, we are bound in time and space because it is, we are in the lower hemisphere, and that being in the upper hemisphere, and it is a projection of the divine into the lower hemisphere. So that delight, that consciousness, that existence, if these were not there in its true origin, if these were not eternal, how come we could exist? Because again, we live by that existence only, we live by that consciousness, maybe that reflected consciousness very, very down below, but it is again, the source is there, that is why we are conscious. Then also the delight, we wouldn't have been able to have even an iota of ananda, delight in us. In whatever way we feel delight, ananda, from whatever source, we might say, because someone spoke of me very beautifully, he was kind to me, and I feel delight. It is not because of him only, because it is through him the divine has poured down that delight onto me. Of course, he is an instrument, or she is an instrument, or something is an instrument through which the delight pours down. But in essence, in its origin, in its source, it is that divine which knows eternally. That is why he is omniscient, omnipotent, and omnipresent also. But for him to become or present himself here, we will have to make ourselves ready. And that is it, the path of the integrality or the integral path shown by Sri Aurobindo. To grow in our consciousness, to let the divine presence in us, which is the psychic being as we know, to take reign of our outer mind, then our emotions, vital, and also the body. Then only we can say, as we always read in Book 11, the realm of life divine, intuitive beams shall pour down, and this life becomes the life divine, then only it will be possible. So we can conclude here itself today, and afterwards, time permitting, we'll take up a lot more things about ourselves of which we are not aware. In fact, it is such a pity that we do not know ourselves, how we are formed, what we receive. We think, I do, I say. But in effect, in actuality, we receive from the outer contexts through our sensory perceptions, through the five senses, and also, as we discussed, through the next level, that is what is behind the outer consciousness, that is inner or subliminal consciousness, in which there are also inner mind, inner vital, inner physical. And behind that, there is the inmost mind, inmost vital, inmost physical. And at the core of it, it is the psychic being. And for the psychic being to take possession of our whole being, that is what is called sadhana. So even if we stray sometimes, even if we feel dejected, even if we feel uh, absolutely hopeless at times, let us never forget that the Divine Mother is with us, who is here to uplift us. And she will not let us down for eternity until and unless we become divine in our nature, divinely conscious in our nature. So that's it for the day. Thank you so much. If you have any question, you can ask. Okay then, thank you. Jai Ma.